Our scripture passage this morning comes from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 23, verses 1 through 12. Hear the word of the Lord. Then the whole assembly rose and led him off to Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, "We have found this man subverting our nation. He opposes payment of taxes to Caesar and claims to be Messiah, a king." So Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "You have said so," Jesus replied. Then Pilate announced to the chief priests and the crowd, "I find no basis for a charge against this man." But they insisted, "He stirs up the people all over Judea by his teaching. He started in Galilee and has come all the way here." On hearing this, Pilate asked if the man was a Galilean. When he learned that Jesus was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased, because for a long time he had been wanting to see him. From what he had heard about him, he hoped to see him perform a sign of some sort. He plied him with many questions, but Jesus gave him no answer. The chief priests and the teachers of the law were standing there vehemently accusing him. Then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him. Dressing him in an elegant robe, they sent him back to Pilate. That day, Herod and Pilate became friends. Before this, they had been enemies. This is the word of the Lord to us given on this day. Thanks be to God.
My name's Sherrill. I'm the pastor here at Payless Community Church. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. And we are currently in one of my favorite seasons, one of my favorite church seasons, if you will. Today is the second Sunday in this season that we call Lent. And if Lent is an unfamiliar term with you, that's okay. It's the 6 weeks leading up to Easter is what Lent is. And many churches take these 6 weeks that lead up to Easter in this season called Lent, and they take these weeks to prepare for the miracle that took place when Jesus rose from the dead. Now, I like Lent because it can be so easy for us to kind of skip to the good stuff of Easter morning and the celebration, and then we miss how truly good the cross was for us. And so this Lent, we're gonna focus on what happened to Jesus after his arrest in the garden and before his resurrection on Easter morning. Now, last week we had some wooden crosses available for each family to take home, and over the next 5 weeks, we'll have another item for you to pick up each week, and you can place that item either on or at the foot of the cross. And these items will hopefully be reminders to you and to your family throughout this season of Lent leading up to Easter, also for this whole year and the years to come, of what Jesus endured for you and for me. Now, last week, like I said, we handed out crosses. We've got a handful more. If any of you were not here with us last week, you can see one of our greeters on the way out. We've got a few more of the crosses, and you can take one of those home with you today. And last week, we handed out these crosses, and the understanding of what the cross really was has been sort of sanitized and ritualized today. You see, everyone in Jesus' day, they knew exactly what the cross was. An unrelenting instrument of death. And only death. That's all the cross was. It was an instrument of death. And as we talk about the cross these next weeks, let's let's not make it about the religious ceremonies or traditions and these spiritual feelings about the cross. Let's truly consider how the cross was a way to execute people. And so when Jesus tells us in Scripture to take up our cross and follow him, we need to think of it as him saying, walk down death row daily and follow me. Right? Taking up your cross, it wasn't a journey. It was a one-way trip. There's no return ticketing. It was never a round trip. The cross was humiliating. It was meant to be degrading. It was scandalous. And it's human nature to avoid scandal. Right? When we make a mistake, we usually don't want anyone to know that we've made a mistake. Little children, they lie at very young ages before they've ever been taught to lie, and they lie because they don't want to get in trouble. The lying for many continues into teenage years and even on into adulthood. It's in our sinful nature to do whatever we can to avoid scandal. Often that desire to avoid scandal that we've created, it comes at someone else's expense. Celebrities and politicians, they're kind of known for always seeming to have some sort of scandalous situation they're involved in, and they're constantly trying to dig themselves out of the hole that they have put themselves in. The Dallas Cowboys, they even have somebody on retainer whose job it is to fix any situation before it could become a scandal for the Cowboys. There's a man named David Wells who's known as the fixer for the Cowboys. All the way back in 2000, wide receiver Michael Irvin found himself in a pretty uncomfortable, pretty bad situation, and this guy, David Wells, he raced to get there before the media could get there. And Wells counseled Irvin, and he told Irvin to give this impromptu press conference for the media. So the media showed up to cover this big story, and then he gives this impromptu press conference. And in the Washington Post, they had an article on this, and it says this. It says the entire episode wound up being just as forgettable as Irvin's words, and that was the point. See, why would the Dallas Cowboys have someone like David Wells on retainer? Well, it's because the potential to avoid a scandal is worth the cost. See, humans will do almost anything to avoid a scandal. But God did the opposite. As we look at the death of Jesus by crucifixion, and as we look at everything that led up to that, we'll see that God intentionally chose a scandalous way to die for our sins. Scandals are memorable. Scandals are humiliating. And when someone will endure a scandalous situation in your place, it communicates how much they love you. See, after Jesus was arrested, he was forced to endure a mock trial where people falsely accused him. He was then sent to Pilate, who really couldn't find any guilt in Jesus. But because Pilate feared the crowds, he ceremonially washes his hands of Jesus. But before Pilate sent him away to be crucified, he sends him to King Herod. And Herod and these Roman soldiers, then they had some fun with Jesus. Our passage today from Luke, chapter 23, verse 8 says this. When Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased, because for a long time he'd been wanting to see him. From what he had heard about him, he hoped to see him perform a sign of some sort. He plied him with many questions, but Jesus gave him no answer. Now, don't misunderstand Herod's interest in Jesus. See, him having any interest in Jesus, it wasn't that he had an interest in the Messiah. His interest is merely for selfish entertainment. But Jesus didn't feed into Herod's need to be entertained, and Jesus stood there silent before Herod, not letting anything get in the way of his purpose. Herod is none too pleased. If we were to continue reading in verse 11, we see this. It says, "Then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him. Dressing him in an elegant robe, they sent him back to Pilate." Now this ridicule and mockery shows what Herod really thought about Jesus. When Jesus refused to entertain him, Herod entertained himself by mistreating Jesus. Not wanting Jesus in his silence to do the mocking, Herod thinks that he takes control of the situation with this kind of comical presentation of Jesus in a royal robe. But we see from Psalm chapter 22, verses 7 and 8, we were actually told that this would happen long before Herod does this. It says in Psalm 22, starting at verse 7, "All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. He trusts in the Lord," they say. "Let the Lord rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him." See, the passage in Luke says that they put an elegant robe on Jesus. The Gospels of Mark and John, they say that it was, they describe it as a purple robe. The book of Matthew says that it was scarlet. And I want to pause just for a bit here and address the discrepancy that we see in Scripture with the colors here. The fact that Mark and John say that it was a purple robe and that Matthew says it was scarlet, this is not a conflict. Realistically, there was no quality control back then. Dyes that they used for fabrics were not color fast. They often changed shades depending upon the dyeing process. The same Greek word that's translated as purple can also mean any shade from violet to crimson, or any color really between blue and red. In fact, the ancients, especially the Romans, they used the word purple when speaking of various shades of red. And so these different colors sometimes would be called by the same name. And it's important to clarify, because what the soldiers and Herod were communicating while they were ridiculing Jesus was their understanding that he was being referred to, that he was being called a king. And a king of that day often wore a purple robe. Jesus must have looked anything but royal to Herod and to these Roman soldiers, because clothing for common people back then was usually drab and unbleached. It was hand woven, usually from sheep or goat's wool. I'm sure that was probably the type of clothing that Jesus wore. Only the extremely rich could afford these expensive dyed cloths. See, to dye something purple back then was a pretty laborious task. The liquid that they used to make the purple dye, it came from the gland of a tiny Mediterranean sea snail. Each snail produced only a single drop of this needed fluid, and to produce 1 pound of dye during ancient Roman times required 4 million mollusks. So the color of this robe, it has so much meaning, because purple is not just a random color used for royalty. God sets up the meaning of purple long before this moment in history. See, as Jesus is being mocked, as they're putting this royal robe on him, Scripture is being fulfilled. Now, the tabernacle that's described in the book of Numbers, it's a picture of the ministry of Jesus as our high priest and king. This is where I get really excited by God's perfect plan to save us. Because God's plan for redemption was set into motion before Jesus was born. The tabernacle in the Old Testament, it foreshadowed Jesus in so many beautiful ways. The door of the tabernacle, which was the tabernacle's only entrance, just one entrance, it faced east. And it was this wide curtain colored blue on one end and red on the other end, and the colors blended in the middle to make purple. Likewise, the veil that we see in the temple during Jesus' day, the veil that tore at his crucifixion, that protectively separated man from God, has this same color scheme. See, blue for the sky was the color of deity. Red for the Judean hills was the color for mankind. And being blended to purple represented the God-man who by his death became the door. He became our only access to the Father. Jesus himself said in John 14:6, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Now imagine this veil that was in the temple during Jesus' time. It was this thick, woven material. The veil was believed to have been 4 inches thick. It was one solid piece of material. It wasn't like some curtain that we see on stages today that could open and close in the middle. This big, solid, 4-inch thick piece of material. And the priest who would enter into the Holy of Holies only once a year, they had to go underneath the veil to gain access to the Ark of the Covenant. Now, this protection that the veil offered was needed because God's presence would appear in a cloud over the ark. And any unauthorized individual who entered into the Holy of Holies would immediately die. See, because of our sin, we couldn't be in the presence of God and live. And so this purple veil protected the people of God. But once Jesus died, and his blood washed us clean, Scripture tells us that when he died, the veil in the temple tore in half from top to bottom. And when that veil tore, we gained direct access to God. So everything that Herod and these soldiers did that was meant to humiliate Jesus, what they didn't know, what they didn't understand, the truth that they were actually declaring, and how Jesus allowed this humiliation, this scandal, was so that we didn't have to suffer eternal separation from God. See, he is our king. He's the King of kings. His kingdom will never end. Isaiah proclaimed this 1,000 years prior. Isaiah chapter 9, starting in verse 6, Isaiah says, "For to us a child is born. To us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this." So as we continue in Lent, preparing our hearts for the celebration of Easter, be careful not to be among the mockers. See, it's possible for us to mock Jesus today by the way we live. When we don't understand his call to take up our cross and follow him, when we don't understand that's a one-way ticket, we mock him. When we don't submit to his place as king, but we do things our own way, we mock him. We can be guilty of mocking him when we pretend to worship him. If we come here on a Sunday to worship, but we're distracted and preoccupied, we mock him. Charles Spurgeon once said that you have mocked and insulted him even in your hymns and prayers. For your religion is a pretense with no heart in it. You brought him an adoration that was no adoration, a confession that was no confession, and a prayer that was no prayer. Last week we just finished up an 8-week series on worship. We talked throughout that series about how we have to be intentional when we gather to worship. You see, it's really easy to sit here and yet not really be present. Don't let anything separate you from worshiping Jesus today or any day. Now, this morning as you leave worship, I want to ask somebody in your household, one person in your house, we've got these crosses that we said we're one per family, and I want to make sure somebody in your house takes the purple cloth that we have on the table as you leave here. And what you can do is take it home and then place it around the cross that you have. If, again, like I said, we've got a few more crosses if you didn't grab one last week. But every time you see this cloth, remember that even though the soldiers mocked Jesus as king, we will worship him as king. Remember also how the purple veil in the temple was torn when he died on the cross. It gives us direct access now to God. And so when you see this cloth, let it remind you that Christ chose the scandalous cross. He died a sinner's death so that we, the true sinner, could be saved. Would you pray with me? Father God, we sometimes miss so much of what happened when we read through the story of Christ's crucifixion, because it's so familiar to us. We've heard it so many times. We've celebrated his resurrection on Easter. I pray, God, that you would help us this week, this year, to spend some time thinking about what happened in between his arrest and his resurrection. That we would see even the way that he was ridiculed and mocked as Herod and the Roman soldiers put a royal robe on him. Yet we know that he is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And so I pray, God, that you would help us to, this week, maybe as we walk by these little crosses in our homes and we see that purple cloth hanging over the cross, that we would remember that while there were some, and there are still some today who mock him, we worship him as king. We will remember looking at this purple cloth that the veil was torn forever. The veil that separated us from God was forever torn, that we have now direct access because of what Jesus did for us on the cross in our place. Lord, thank you for what you did. Thank you for what you endured. Thank you for what you accomplished on the cross. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Before we kind of move into our time where we pray for our offering this morning, we've got an opportunity to see another video, and we'll be able to see these videos of other covenant partners here at Payless Community Church as part of our Stewardship Month leading up to the last Sunday of the month. That's March 27th, where we will have an opportunity to bring our personal covenants, which is our discipleship commitments, as well as our stewardship cards, and that's how we're committing to financially support the church and the ministries God has called us to. A couple quick announcements before we watch this video. It went out in the mail this week, was a letter from the church, and it had these stewardship response cards and a covenant card in it. If you did not receive that, we've got some copies out on the table in our entryway. What that means is either the post office messed up, we've got your address and it's not the correct address, or maybe you've been attending and we don't have your address yet. And I want to encourage you, even if you're attending, if you're not a covenant partner, if you haven't joined our church, and you're not on our mailing list, but you'd like to see what those personal covenants and those stewardship cards are all about, we've got copies out there. I'd love to encourage you to grab one of those and ask yourself how it is that you feel God leading you to be part of the ministries here at Payless Community Church. But let's go ahead and watch this video of Stewardship Spotlight. Well, Martha, thank you for joining me today as part of our Stewardship Spotlight for our Stewardship Month here at Payless Community Church. And I want to begin by asking you if you'd introduce yourself to everyone who's watching. Tell us how long you've been here at Payless Community Church, and also share with us a number of the different ways that you have served in the ministries here over the years.
Okay, my name is Martha Sherrill, and I joined the church in 1991. That's over 30 years ago, Steve. And since that time, I have served in another number of capacities. I started on the evangelical team a long time ago, and then I went into the Stephen ministry and enjoyed that ministry. It's a very rewarding ministry, and I enjoyed that for about 6 or 7 years. And then I started, I took the training for the small group leadership, and I led some of the small groups at that time. And then I became an elder and enjoyed that. I was on the team, the hospitality team, and led that for 3 years. And then I had to step back because my husband became ill, and I had to take care of him.
I remember a conversation you had with me shortly after I came here as the pastor, where you sort of apologetically explained your situation, that you used to be very involved, and now you're full-time caregiving for your husband, and so you're not involved in the ministries other than attending church the way that you used to be. Do you remember that conversation?
I do.
Shortly after I got here, Bill passed away, and then you moved into a new home. And after you moved, you came up to me again, and after church on a Sunday, and you told me, Steve, I'm asking myself a really important question, which is the question, what's next? I'm wondering if you could share with us, what was that process like? What were you really asking when you were saying, what's next for me?
Well, I realized that my role in life had changed, and I was no longer a caregiver, and I felt that this wasn't the end. Something else was there, and I felt like I was on a threshold. And so I asked God, what do you want me to do, Lord? I want to do something for you and for the church. And I prayed long and hard. I explored the Stephen ministry again, and I knew I wouldn't want to be an elder. And I just thought maybe the small group ministry was a good spot for me to be in. And I looked around, and I felt that the need was here for a long-term, ongoing, in-depth Bible study. And that's when I came back to you and said, I want to do this.
And Martha, when you decided to do a Bible study, this happened during the pandemic when a lot of things were being done by video to give people opportunities to join in from home in a way where they felt comfortable and safe. For somebody in your demographic, I won't release your age on our video, but in your demographic, a lot of times people say, oh, that's not for me. Yet you jumped right into this Bible study and also did it in a digital format using Zoom and doing this all online. And, tell me a little bit about that.
Well, it was a challenge, I must admit that, but I came to the church for help on that too. So Jill Long and I are partners in this, and she does the technical part, and I do the Bible study. It's impacted me in a number of ways. I have a deeper understanding of the themes in the Bible, what the Bible is saying, and what the stories are all about, and how it all points to Jesus. Thousands of years, people have been writing, and that all points to Jesus. And that's amazing to me. And so for Zoom, I think that opens the door for a lot of more people to come in, especially those who are fighting health issues, and they can join me on Zoom, and I just think that's a good thing.
Now, as we're in our Stewardship Month, we know here at Payless Community Church, stewardship is really a conversation of discipleship. It's how are we giving of our time to God and to the ministries of the church? How do we use those specific talents and abilities and gifts that God has blessed each one of us with? And also, how do we give of our resources to support the ministries of the church? And I'm wondering if you could share how that has blessed you to be at this stage of your life, to continue to be involved in giving of yourself in ministry.
Well, what I do is a gift from God. I just feel that it's God's gift to me, so I have to give something back to Him. And I do so through this Bible study. And it's just has brought me so much peace to know that I'm doing God's work. And if you feel that peace, you know it's the right spot for you. That this is where God wants you to be. And that's what I feel.
Well, Martha, you just said God has gifted you with things, and it's our role to now gift those back to Him. That's a perfect explanation of stewardship. And so I want to thank you for being here with us today and for sharing some of your stewardship story with us.
Okay, thank you.